Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, led one of the most devastating expansions the world has ever seen. In the 13th century, his campaigns swept across Asia and parts of Europe with unmatched brutality. Entire cities, like Nishapur and Merv, were reportedly burned. Historical estimates suggest that tens of millions of people died as a result of Mongol conquests. Men, women, children, entire cultures wiped out like they never existed. This wasn't just war. It was total domination, often involving massive killing, destruction of infrastructure, and psychological warfare designed to break entire populations before resistance could even begin. And then, what happened? Did he stand before some final court of justice? Was there a moment where every oppression he committed was accounted for? Every life weighed? Every scream answered? No. He died in 1227, quietly, naturally, and was buried with honor. His grave, according to legend, was even hidden to preserve his dignity. The man responsible for unimaginable suffering exited the world not as a condemned criminal, but as a revered ruler. Now stop and think, really think. Especially about atheism. If that's the end of the story, is that justice? If atheism is true, who ultimately delivers justice to those who were oppressed, killed, or abused? What answers the suffering of women and children whose lives were destroyed, whose voices were never heard? If that question makes you uncomfortable, it should. Because once you step inside an atheistic worldview and really follow it to its logical end, something starts to feel unstable. Justice is no longer guaranteed, but it becomes conditional. It's mean, atheism doesn't deny justice. It just relocates it. It places it entirely in human hands, courts, laws, governments, international systems. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. We do need these systems. But here's the problem. Human justice is fragile. It depends on evidence that can be hidden, power that can be abused, systems that can be corrupted, time that eventually runs out. And history does not whisper this, it shouts it. Look beyond Genghis Khan. Adolf Hitler oversaw the Holocaust, millions systematically murdered. Yet he never stood in a courtroom. He ended his own life before facing judgment. The moral account was never settled. Joseph Stalin ruled through fear, purges, and forced starvation. Millions suffered under his policies. He died in power. Mao Zedong, his policies during the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution are linked to tens of millions of deaths. And yet, like others, he died without ever answering for those lives. Now be precise. Under atheism, these are not temporary gaps in justice. These are permanent outcomes. There is no final correction, no ultimate balancing of the scales. Now let's move more deeper, because even if you try to defend atheism by saying, we create justice ourselves, moral grounding problem slams into you even harder with the question. What exactly makes anything truly wrong? Not illegal, not unpopular, not harmful, wrong. If there's no higher, transcendent source for right and wrong, then nothing is objectively evil. It's just whatever groups of humans happen to dislike or label bad at any given moment. Rape, genocide, the wiping out of entire cultures like what happened under Mongol campaigns. On atheism, these aren't truly wrong in any binding, unbreakable sense. They're just behaviors some people evolved to call negative because of survival instincts, culture, or personal feelings. Atheists often reach for answers like evolutionary ethics, social contracts, or human flourishing. Sam Harris's go-to argument. They claim morality naturally bubbles up from empathy shaped by natural selection or rational agreement. But stop and think carefully. If morality is a survival mechanism, then it's a tool, not a truth. If it's a social agreement, then it's a consensus, not an objective reality. That means when you say, "This is evil," what you really mean, under atheism, is, "This strongly violates our preferences or survival strategy." That's a massive downgrade, because we don't feel like morality is a preference. We experience it as something real, binding, unavoidable. This is where David Hume becomes unavoidable. He pointed out a gap that atheism still hasn't closed. You cannot derive an ought from an is. You can describe facts all day, biology, psychology, evolution, but none of those facts logically produce a moral obligation. No matter how advanced neuroscience becomes, it cannot explain why you should not torture an innocent person. It can explain why you feel it's wrong, but that's not the same thing. And thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche didn't try to hide this. He followed the logic all the way through. Remove God, and you don't just remove religion. You dissolve the foundation of objective moral values. What remains is human-created meaning, not universal truth. Atheists like Sam Harris attempt to rebuild morality using concepts like well-being. But again, why should well-being matter in any ultimate sense? Why is suffering objectively bad, rather than just biologically disliked? Without a higher standard, you can promote well-being, but you cannot demand it. So atheism ends up in a quiet contradiction. It speaks the language of objective morality, while standing on a framework that cannot fully support it. Now let's talk about another important aspect where atheism is honest but still deeply unstable: meaning and purpose. Atheism doesn't pretend the universe has built-in meaning. It openly says, there is none. No grand purpose, no ultimate direction. So the solution offered is simple: create your own. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus framed this as freedom. You forge meaning in a silent, indifferent universe. On the surface, it sounds bold, even empowering, but slow down and really examine it. If the universe itself is ultimately pointless, then any meaning you create is temporary by definition. It exists only as long as your mind does. Raising a family, fighting injustice, building something lasting, whatever purpose you choose, ends the moment your brain shuts down. After that, it disappears into the same void that swallowed every empire, every victim, every memory. So ask the question, is that real meaning or just psychological comfort? Because something you invent is not something you discover. It's something you assign. And what is assigned can just as easily be removed. It may feel meaningful, but feeling is not the same as truth. Even Fyodor Dostoevsky saw where this leads. Without God, not only does moral grounding weaken, purpose itself starts to collapse. Not dramatically, but quietly. Everything becomes permissible, yes, but also, in the long run, everything becomes pointless. Atheism responds, subjective meaning is enough. It feels real to us. But that answer raises a sharper problem. If your life's purpose is ultimately just something your brain generates to cope with an indifferent universe, then is it actually real in any objective sense? Or is it a refined illusion that helps you get through the day? Because if it vanishes completely, leaving no trace in reality itself, then meaning is not a feature of the universe. It's a feature of your psychology. And look around. This isn't just theory. You see rising existential anxiety, burnout from chasing pleasure that doesn't satisfy, people attaching themselves to extreme ideologies or causes with almost religious intensity, trying to fill a gap that doesn't seem to close. When meaning is self-made, it often behaves like a placebo. It works until you realize there was nothing behind it. And once that realization hits, the question becomes unavoidable. If meaning is something we create just to cope, then what happens when the illusion stops working? So after all that, let's be completely honest. If atheism is right, then there's really no problem here. No need for ultimate justice, because nothing ultimately needs to be made right. No need for objective morality, because wrong is just what we happen to dislike. No need for lasting meaning, because temporary distraction is apparently enough. No need for final accountability, because escaping consequences is just part of the system. No need for deeper answers, because that's just how it is, counts as an explanation. And all those instincts you feel, that oppression should be answered, that good and evil are real, that life should mean something beyond a few decades. So what are these feelings then? Useful illusions? Evolutionary side effects? Or emotional habits? So yes, if atheism is true, then everything fits perfectly. A universe where injustice can win permanently makes sense. A world where meaning disappears completely makes sense. A reality where morality shifts with opinion makes sense. Nothing is broken, because nothing at the deepest level was ever required to be whole. And maybe that's the cleanest way to say it. Atheism doesn't fail by contradiction. It succeeds by lowering the standard of what needs to be explained.